Whoa! Is that
Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl.
Get the f out, man!
Hello. I just watched a video called Why Are Platform Fighters Failing by a YouTuber named KazooCat, and it got me really antsy to sit down and start typing up my own take on this very same question. And, you know, part of that is honestly because I disagree a lot with what KazooCat had to say in that video. I agree with some points, which I'll elaborate on, but at the same time, I also think they were very misinformed on some of their arguments. I also just need to point out right now that this video is not in any way meant to put down that video or to put down KazooCat in any way. I just wanted to make this video. That video was uploaded like 8 months ago relative to when I'm going to be uploading this video. And I wouldn't be making this video if I just didn't randomly stumble across it. So, KazooCat, thank you, but also I'm sorry. But anyways, I think in the last few years, as we've seen quite a few plat fighters come out with varying levels of success, everyone has started to pick up on a trend when it comes to platform fighters, and it's that they just can't replace Smash. I might even go so far as to say that we'll never have a platform fighter that can or will replace Smash. And I also think that the opportunity for such a thing to happen is kind of a ship that's already sailed and crashed into an iceberg. I'm not going to base my discussion on why plat fighters are failing, because I think that's a bit of a subjective measurement on its own. And by many metrics, we'll take Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 1 as an example. That game was actually a huge success, even though many of us recognize it and remember it as, well, bad. And I mean, that's coming from me, a guy who played that game competitively. Nick Brawl 1 sold extremely well. It was made on a shoestring budget with like less than a year of game development time. And so, you know, however you want to measure it, I think that Nick Brawl 1 did do really well. It was a successful game. But I think, you know, what we're after isn't whether or not these games succeed by some relative terms. I think what we're really after is why can't these games kill Smash, or, you know, compete with it, or be a peer. I will quickly gloss over and mention games that are successful by, you know, relative terms again, like Rivals of Aether 1 and 2. But I think, you know, the goal with those games, again, relative metrics here, was to appeal to competitive Smash players or competitive platform fighters, people who like the genre and like the feel of it, but who don't want to play Melee, but do want a polished game. So, you know, despite the success and the continued player base that those games have, it's not going to replace Smash. I don't think that those games are ever going to replace Smash, and they're probably not trying to either. And also, just, I guess, a quick plug to myself, I am actually working on a platform fighter for a school project, and that's partially why this topic interests me so much. So please subscribe if you want to follow my devlogs and listen to me talk more about game design stuff, and also if you want to see me post art and things like that. So, KazooCat kicks off their video with this point, and for the most part, I think actually they're right. I don't disagree with the main big picture thing here, which is that trying to make Melee 2 is a mistake. I talked about this very briefly in my video about my platform fighter project, but I'm going to expand on it a whole lot more here. Melee is a 23-year-old game, and happy to say I'm like barely older than that, by the way. And while successful, its modern relevance and I think our perceived value in the way that Melee is specifically designed, I think is very overblown by the existence of a competitive scene for that game. And what I mean by that is that we can compare relatively Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, a significantly more successful game in terms of sheer sales, to Melee. Their competitive scenes are pretty similar sizes, and of course they're in the same genre, they're the same franchise. One then might even be able to get the false impression that Melee is currently just as culturally relevant and prevalent as Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, thus it's worth it to try to emulate Melee's model, I guess. For some of you, that argument probably is just a total miss, and I think that also is part of my point, right? As chronically online obsessive fans of platform fighters or competitive Smash, we might think that Melee is the model that should be replicated, or at least that model is something that we pay a lot of attention to and put a lot of importance in when we think about our own enjoyment when it comes to Smash. And even, you know, despite its age, it puts up a fight with Ultimate as the... Hello, Mickey. Even despite its age, it puts up a fight with Ultimate as the leading competitive platform fighter. We love Melee's mechanics and how the game feels, but even though that stuff matters a lot to us, and you included assuming you're a sweat like me, And that stuff matters a lot to the people who are often responsible for developing modern platform fighters, who are happy to make those games as their own love letters to melee and competitive plat fighting, because for a lot of them, that's also their own background. It just really doesn't matter to a lot of people, to a majority of people, actually. Most people just aren't hungry for a super fluid, competitively balanced game. They just want a game that's fun, whatever that means, and that's it. Yes, people will play games like Nasby and Multiverses because of the IP, and seeing their favorite characters and references to shows and things like that are a part of the fun, but competitive PvP games are not fun for a lot of people, and let's face it, fighting games are frustrating. Competitive games are frustrating. Competitive fighting games especially are ultra frustrating. If you have nothing else to provide for people who play this game, the average person, besides PvP, they're just gonna go play Stardew Valley when they get pissed off instead, or they're gonna go outside instead. So that's why I think trying to use melee as the model and using that really as like the core of your attention that you're giving to this game in development, I think that is a mistake. At least, you know, if you're trying to get a broad appeal and you're trying to get a lot of people to play your game. I can't ignore that there are hugely popular... God, it's so hot, by the way. I don't know if I'm starting to sweat on camera. It's like 92 degrees today, and I had to turn off my fan in my room just so I don't get it blowing on my microphone. But anyways, I can't ignore that there are hugely popular mainstream competitive games like League of Legends, Overwatch at the time, and of course Valorant. And I can't speak so much for Valorant, but I think part of that game's success, being a Riot game just like League, is just the cultural wave that managed to appear despite League of Legends being a competitive game. League became a competitive spectacle, like a peer to many global physical sports. I'm not gonna dive into like how that even happened, but I guess we can say, at least, right, that if you want to market or push a platform fighter into the cultural zeitgeist as a competitive spectacle, that might be how you can get a leg up on Smash and maybe try to become a peer or a competitor or kill it, I guess. But I still also have to point out that League has a lot of other stuff that's fun for casual players to do, you know, despite maybe popular belief or your own personal anecdotal experience. The character designs are fun. There's lore to read in comics, and now there's also like Arcane, the show. Old League really like truly had its own charm and quirky personality that I think was fun to connect with at a time when that game was actually quite a bit smaller. And then there's also the wacky like events like Earth and whatever that pop up every now and then there's also ARAM and other casual alternative game modes to like refresh your brain. You know, there's things that keep you playing the game outside of this one particular gameplay loop. KazooCat also makes a point here in his video that competitive design comes at the cost of having fun. And I think I disagree with this granular point, but I think we'll come to an agreement in the big picture of what goes wrong with focusing on competitive gameplay. Wave dashing, advanced combos, meter mechanics, and other advanced features and things like that can be added to a game without negatively impacting the experience of the average player, whether they're playing that game on their own or with other average players. It doesn't hurt just to have wave dashing in the game. And also, I want to make a point that these features have been improved upon over time to become more intuitive for an easier competitive experience relative to the relatively clunky way that Melee kind of accidentally implemented some of these mechanics. But anyways, it doesn't affect the average person because they can just choose to not use that mechanic, or they will just be ignorant to that mechanic's existence as a whole. Editor's note, on complete accident, this is a clip with me in the background at Heatwave last year. And they'll just keep playing the game like they want to anyways. It's not like when I was younger playing Melee, did I spend all of those hours playing the game with my siblings or with my friends, and at the end of a session think, man, it's too bad wave dashing is in this game. Like, no, I didn't even know that wave dashing existed. I don't think I even really like knew the point in shielding, or I don't even think I knew how to roll or things like that. I was already having fun with the game as a kid. I wasn't even using like aerials either. I was using like less than half of my character's kit and less than like half of the features that were even in the game, but I was still having fun with it. And then when I also found out what else could be done in the game, I was excited about it as an, at the time, casual player, because it unlocked like more stuff for me to do and more things to explore in this game that I already thought was fun. But that's kind of another point there, right? That like those competitive features aren't going to be what makes the game fun for me as a casual player, but it might be like a little handshake after you've given me a fun game already that I'll see those things and be like, great, more ways to play this game. So again, I think that, you know, balance and moveset design and things like that, yeah, they can negatively impact the game, and those can be reasons that people stop playing them. But again, think about what the average player's experience is. If they're going online and playing against competitive-minded people, they're going to get their ass beat in unimaginable ways anyways. But, like, Melee is such an unbalanced game, right? But its unbalance doesn't change the casual player's experience of the game, really. And neither does it really a lot for Ultimate, either. The games are fun on their own as they stand for the average person, because again, the average person is just going to play the game however they want to. However they found it to be fun is how they're going to continue to play it. And you know what else I found fun, and what I spent a lot of time on as well, were things like Melee's adventure mode, classic mode, stadium mode, break the targets, and of course I loved playing with items like with my friends and siblings and things like that. I mentioned this type of thing too with that League of Legends side rant, where I think there's shades of this here too, in that even after my friends went home, or even if there was no one else around to play this game with me, I still found a reason to play Super Smash Bros. Melee. And there were still ways for me to connect with this game. As silly as it may sound, throwing coins into that little gacha vending machine and trying to collect all the trophies and then reading their bios and stuff like that, those were core memories to me. You know what's not a core memory? Almost any experience that I've had with a platform fighter that's come out like since Ultimate, at least. And that includes games like Rivals 2 and even Nasby 2 and Nasby 1, which I played a lot competitively. But that's it. That's all there is for those, for me even, for those games, is to just play it competitively, and there's nothing else for me to make memories out of. So now I think we can compare Smash to other platform fighters and realize why they can't replace Smash. It's because there's nothing to do. Multiverses and Nick Brawl 1 basically had like no solo content at all at launch, or you know, like during beta or whatever for Multiverses, which fair enough, but also like betas are fake these days anyways. It's just like early access, especially if you're accepting payment in any way to play the game or doing microtransactions. And so yeah, despite their initial success, or at least very high early player accounts, those games fell off like rocks. And you know what? Nick Brawl 1 actually did have a classic mode, and I'm not going to use that as the reason for why, but Nick Brawl 1 did extremely well on PlayStation Plus, and it's always done really well on console releases. So somewhere out there, there might be groups of little Timmies or whatever going over to each other's houses to play Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 1, and in 10 years or whatever, there'll be a huge resurgence. Probably not, but you know, even despite that, even despite people still, you know, playing that game with its solo content, it'll never catch on as a mainstream game. It will never be a game that you see people bring to parties like Smash. Well-polished visuals and game feel are all super important to the most general, broad audience of people, whether or not those people would call themselves gamers. If you pulled out a game like Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl at a party, you would get spit on, beaten, and kicked.
Whoa! Is that
Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl.
Get the f out, man!
Smash, however, is something that I see all the time at like grad parties and house parties and whatever. It's a pretty looking game. It has all these characters, and everyone in the room is probably familiar with at least one of them. And so I think there's a lot of things that a platform fighter would need if its real goal truly is to topple Smash, or to try to be a competitor, or to be a peer, I guess. And unfortunately, I think one of those things is pretty much impossible to have now, and that's a strong IP. A strong IP is what will get the average person to turn their head and look at a game that they otherwise never would have even given a chance. When Multiverses came out, do you know how many people that I knew from high school that knew LeBron James was in the game? They would never have paid attention. They never even paid attention to Smash, but they knew that LeBron James was now in Multiverses, and they played it too. And let me tell you, they would never have gotten excited about ABSA or Edalus being in the game. That, in fact, is That in fact is what I mentioned as the, okay, I'm sorry, Mickey, it's time. That in fact is what I mentioned as the ship that has sailed, or the iceberg, I guess. What IPs are even left that could capture a huge span of interests and resonate with a massive potential audience? Off the top of my head, it's like just Disney. I could spend more time brainstorming ideas or other media franchises, but this isn't the only problem for an aspiring Smash killer. Polish is another one of those problems. Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 1 was a game that was made to, and did successfully, print as much money as possible with as little budget as possible, with very little concern for anything else. And admit it, everyone and their grandmothers was excited for NASB 1. It's a new platform fighter, and it's a Nickelodeon one. That's pretty crazy. But the charts don't lie. This game fell off like a brick, even with consideration for the people that played it on PlayStation. Although it did have kind of like a small, weird resurgence on PlayStation because it was on PlayStation Plus or whatever that thing is called. But again, if you pull out this ugly, steaming pile of fish paste at a party, you're getting beaten senseless.
You all know the rules.
An IP is something that'll hook people, but the polish is going to be what keeps them in once they get in. And then in addition to polish, of course, there's going to be the need for actual content to spend time on as well. Mini games, different game modes, unlockables, silly things to look at or read or whatever. Some fun references or animations, quirks, like anything. Really, another word for it is just personality. And then also at this point, let me just give a quick shout out to BRAWLHALLA players, because I know you're just waiting until the end of the video to say something about another platform fighter video that makes no mention of BRAWLHALLA. Well, here you go. But I also have to say that I don't know shit about the game at all, okay? But it's still worth mentioning. I do know something about BRAWLHALLA though, and it's that it was actually a very successful alternative to Smash, and it still is pretty successful and has a pretty big player base. And BRAWLHALLA had something that, for a long time, no other platform fighter replacement really had at all, and that was multi-platform accessibility, and especially it was on mobile. BRAWLHALLA was out early enough to be like one of the first Smash Bros clones, and it was, you know, basically the Smash for people who don't have a Nintendo console. It was well executed enough to stick around, and again, I don't really know anything in depth about the game, but it does have IP crossovers, it's polished and it's accessible, and I'm sure those all contribute to why that game has staying power and why it was successful to begin with. Even if no one's pulling it out at a party, there's definitely kids huddled around their lunch tables playing BRAWLHALLA, and you can't say either of those things about NASB, about Framemakers, or Rushdown Revolt, etc. And in general, as you can see, I think it really a lot of the time boils down to a bad IP, bad accessibility, bad polish, bad content, and while some of these games are, again, actually by some metrics definitely pretty successful, some are definite failures too. I think the games that actually had the best shot of replacing, we're not going to say replace, of like competing with Smash, at least were, or becoming BRAWLHALLA sized, were games like Multiverses and NASB 2, and in fact, Multiverses stole a lot of BRAWLHALLA players for a little while. If NASB 1 never happened and we only got NASB 2, I think it could have been up there for sure. And you know, if it wasn't released for like $60. If Multiverses just had like anything to do in the game, and if it was actually playable online, then maybe that game also had a chance. And by playable, I don't mean like literally right now, I mean like the online was awful for a long time when it was around. That about sums up my thoughts on what a plat fighter needs to be like successful, or my answer to why platform fighters can't replace Smash. I didn't dive into any deep case studies again here because I think that the points that I made already captured 95% of the reasons for why these games couldn't take off to a Smash level or to something closer to like BRAWLHALLA. There are, of course, these special cases I'm going to point out now, like Framemakers, which launched horrendously undercooked for early access, Rushdown Revolt, which burned up all its money and made very questionable decisions that basically took the whole project down in a span of like a few months. NASB 2 launching at $60 with paid DLC, and also being that soon after the public backlash of NASB 1 under the same publisher, and then probably also, you know, Game Mill's not great reputation on its own. But like I said, with the exception of NASB 2, I think, you know, even if those problems weren't there, if the goal is to compete with Smash, which, you know, for a lot of these games it isn't, those problems don't matter much in the long run because they're never going to hit that Smash critical point. And again, I don't think that most of these games really genuinely had lofty goals like competing with Smash, for the record. And I think, you know, since success is relative, some of these games were still successful relatively, but a lot of them also relatively were flops. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's because the genre, I've said this before, I don't think it's actually because the genre is cursed. I have made that statement before in a very general, broad sense. I think that the genre is fine. There's things that are appealing about the genre, and there's fun things that you can do with the genre of the game. It's just that those fun things aren't being implemented in the platform fighters that we have today. Where's the adventure mode? Where's the classic mode? Where's my break the targets and things like that? Nasby 2 had it, but like again, it's another one of those special cases where how do you recover after Nasby 1? And how do you launch that game for $60 to $80? Basically, yeah, these games just miss a fundamental part of what makes a game fun. Even if they do have a strong IP, or if they don't have a strong IP, they're missing casual appeal, fun things to do, charm, personality, polish, and above all, none of them really kept the promises that they made during the development phase of the game, or during the promotional periods. And then one last note, I mentioned I'm making a platform fighter. I would appreciate it if you subscribed and followed me on that journey and did all that. But I also just don't want anyone to read into this video as me trying to like talk harshly on other platform fighters or something like that. I'm fighting against the very same hurdles that these platform fighters are fighting against, and I just want to try to learn from their mistakes and try to, I don't know, vocalize, I guess, my thoughts on why I think a lot of platform fighters have failed in, well, I guess ever since Smash, right? And again, fail in quotes. There's definitely successful platform fighters out right now, like Rivals 1 and 2. It's just a matter of how you look at it. But at the end of the day, this video is to answer not whether or not platform fighters can succeed or fail, because success is relative. It's whether or not they can replace Smash. And my answer is a resounding, I think, no. Because what IPs are left, what developers are left that can actually make a good platform fighter and that are actually interested in making a platform fighter? What big companies can be convinced that making a platform fighter is like the right idea after as many failures as we've had, relatively? So yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.